I'm a grad student at Emory in the neuroscience program. Thanks again to Sean for organizing and for the Christmas present and for letting me use his laptop. And all the other volunteers. I loved all the talks. I like technical talks. I like hearing people's life stories. There's a little of both in mine. So it's called Support Vector Machines for the Birds, because if there's anything I've learned in academia, it's all talk titles should have a colon and then a vague. Okay, so birdsong, what is it and why should you care about it? So this is the species we work with in our lab, thank you these finches. This is a spectrogram I'm showing you in a word bubble from PowerPoint, right? So what you're seeing is frequency on the y-axis, time on the x-axis, and what you can see is these elements that we call syllables that make up the song, so we can label them. And so what's cool about this is that each bird has its own song, and they learn it just like we learn to talk, right? So it's culturally transmitted. We can study them and figure out how they learn, how it happens in their brain, because songbirds, unlike other birds, have a special part of their brain that's just for song. And then we can, for many other reasons, they're interesting scientifically. They have dialects just like we do, so that tells us things. If we look at the dialect in, North versus Southern California, it tells us how we're affecting the environment, things like that. So that's why we care about it scientifically, but the thing is, they'll sing hundreds or thousands of times a day, and it can take a lot of person hours to label all of this song by hand, right? So it would be nice if we could automate that somehow. So that's why we would bring in machine learning, which a couple of people already have talked about today. It's a field where you tell a computer to draw a line dividing some dots, and then you conclude that machines can learn. Or you might say that if you're grumpy and cynical. But there's some really awesome algorithms out there, like support vector machines. So the thing that's special about this way of drawing lines to divide your dots is, well, there's many things, but one thing is that it basically finds a way to separate them the most, and then picks only the dots that are on these, what are called margins, to represent that line. And that line dividing them ends up being a big vector of weights that corresponds to the features that make up these dots, right? So like, for my syllable, I can take out pitch and amplitude, how loud it is, and I can make like a little spectrum of one slice of it, and then throw that all into a big, like a list or whatever data structure I have, and that's all my features, each element in that list. And you have that for each dot, and then the weights are multiplied by that list to tell you which samples, which syllables give you the most information to let you divide up that space. I think I managed to explain that almost. Right, so what I use is the computing part. I use liblinear, which is a package that's written by, or maintained at least by this guy's group at the National Taiwan University. He looks awesome. And he and his group have made interfaces, including one for Python, which is what I'm using. And so a group from Japan put out a paper last year saying that they can do this already. So you might be wondering why I'm even talking to you about automating labeling. What they underemphasized in their results is that it only works if you ignore something that we call intro notes. So see these intro notes, these notes here that are all labeled I, they're low amplitude, they're high entropy, so there's no like red parts in them, right? It looks like white noise, that's what high entropy means. So the birds often sing a big string of them, at least the birds we work with at the beginning of the song, which is why we call them intro notes, but they also happen in other parts of the song too. And so I went through, tried to repeat the results, and then I realized, I'm not getting very good accuracy. So like, here's 3 random birds I picked. One bird, the algorithm looks great. This is accuracy on the y-axis, right? So it's like up near 100%. But then the other 2 birds, we're getting down to like 65%. Okay, and so I was like, all right, they failed to point out that they had taken out the intro notes in their abstract. So now the y-axis has changed, right? This is 96% down here, right? So I take out all the intro notes, and accuracy goes way up, and just to hammer that point home, right, here's the same Y scale, so you can see over here. You know, the SVM does much better if you take out these intro notes, which means the intro notes are real. To me, that is. And so that could suggest that the case is that if you have more intro notes in your sample you use to train the model, which is what you get back out of the algorithm that you then use to classify your new data, maybe having more intro notes makes it worse as a model, but that's not the case. So this guy got the best classification, but he has the most intro notes in his sample. That's the guy that I showed you with them all at the beginning of the song. Okay, so what's going on? Who's getting this classified? So let me walk you through this. What you're seeing here is, you know, the 3 different birds. The box on the left in each pair is the intro notes classification accuracy, and what's on the right is every other note. So clearly it's the case that it's the intro notes that are getting misclassified as other types of syllables. But the really weird thing is that having the intro notes actually increases the accuracy for all the other syllables. So if someone who is more familiar with this has any ideas on why that would be the case, I would love to know. But you know, sort of my take-homes are that using this method is relatively painless. Like, I hadn't done it before. I had to like do some nerdy computer things like compile the DLL for 64-bit, but this is like 30 hours, including me learning how to do matplotlib. And this is for like this sort of intractable case, right? Like, if you had something like, I want to know about my people who donate money to my nonprofit versus people that don't, that would probably work a lot better. I'm getting 99% accuracy on something where you have to classify a whole bunch of different categories, right? So, but as far as what I need to do to improve it, I can try to use those weights that you get out to rank which features are good. I can try a different type of support vector machine that uses the kernel, which is just like a fancy math trick. And it might help to use some time dependence. So, they always sing the syllables in a certain order. That's information that the support vector machine doesn't really pay attention to. So that's what I'm thinking about now. Thanks for listening. Yeah.
How do the SVMs deal with syllables that have multiple?
So, as it is now, the people that did it in the past, they just collapse everything down over time. So you take like an average spectrum that's just smashing everything down, averaging across that. So that's a good question. Yeah.
In terms of improving this, you might want to start playing around with a number of classes or categories that you have, because if the signals are drastically different from the initial part of the song compared to the other features of the dialect, then they might be separated so far apart that you might not be slicing up the space effectively enough. And also, I would try some other clustering algorithms on this that require different constraints. If you start to really think about the constraints of the data that you have, there might be a better machine learning algorithm to at least vet this against. And then also try some like cross-validation mechanisms so that you're not working so visually, and you're working a lot more quantitatively about the efficacy of the models that you're building.
So cross-validation in terms of like liblinear does its own cross-validation where it does fivefold and it spits out and tells you how well it's working. Is that what you mean? Or?
Yeah. So start setting up those things, and communicating that story a little bit might help you yourself also, because if you start testing other clustering algorithms, then the cross-validation metrics actually allow you to compare different models to each other, right? So different machine learning mechanisms.
Okay. Is it like, what would your first?
I look at. My first thing is always to go to scikit-learn, which is the kind of the more generic machine learning toolbox for Python. There's a lot of extensions to it, but like to start, it gives you a good flowchart about how to make a decision. Do you need to cluster? Do you need to do reduced embedding? Do you have a linear or nonlinear system? It's a good place to start, at least like a high level there.
Yeah, that is a good flow chart. I've used that flow chart.
Yeah, and then the other thing I would think about is doing some convolutions of your signals over time, and that would give you some like temporal relationship. So what's the probability that if I have an initial dialect, what's the probability that an initial one follows that, or that a meaningful one follows that? You can start to extract those sorts of values using some things over time.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, so I'm also programming. I wanted to point out a few resources that might be available. Like you asked the question of why the support vector machines performing better on the non-sort of noise data when there is more noise. That's a question that Lee Cooper might be able to answer in particular. He does a lot of machine learning stuff, and a lot of the folks in the computer science department do a ton of machine learning stuff and like talk courses on that kind of thing. So I guess I don't know how much you already interact with them. You might already be, but they're a pretty good resource, and we're generally pretty friendly people. So I highly recommend, like, if you're still working on this, trying to explore different things, absolutely like ask them, because people can probably help you answer those kind of questions, figure out what to try next. Like if you get really excited about this kind of stuff too, like absolutely, if you talk to people, they may have that help.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah.
Comments / recommendations.
Yeah. All right, thanks everybody again.
So way outside my field, but I'm excited about it.